The cemetery was still wet from the morning rain when my son-in-law David leaned over my daughter's grave and whispered in my ear, "Don't worry, Margaret. I'll take good care of everything Sarah left behind. You won't have to worry about finances anymore." His smile was cold, calculated. At that moment, standing next to my daughter's fresh grave, I realized he wasn't offering help. He was declaring ownership. Can you imagine burying your only child and, in the same breath, discovering that the person she trusted most was already planning to steal what was rightfully yours? What would you do if someone tried to take advantage of your deepest grief to rob you blind? I stood silent at that cemetery, but I already knew that within 72 hours, the reading of Sarah's will would reveal a truth that would forever change the power dynamic in our family. What David didn't know was that my daughter had been far more strategic than anyone could have imagined. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 63 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of the most respected law firms in the state. I spent 40 years building a reputation in corporate litigation, handling cases worth millions of dollars, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for the legal battle that was about to unfold in my own family. Sarah had been my everything, my brilliant, beautiful daughter who had built a successful tech startup from scratch, who had married David when she was 28 and believed she had found her soulmate. For 12 years, I watched their marriage, always feeling that something wasn't quite right about him. But Sarah seemed happy, so I kept my concerns to myself. Now, standing at her funeral after a sudden heart attack at 39, I was beginning to understand that my maternal intuition had been absolutely correct. The funeral reception was held at Sarah's house, a stunning colonial mansion that she had purchased 3 years earlier. As family and friends shared memories, I noticed David moving through the rooms with a proprietary air, already speaking about his house and his decisions. He had invited his brother Michael, a real estate appraiser, who was discreetly photographing rooms and taking notes. The audacity was breathtaking. "Margaret," David approached me near the kitchen, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this is difficult, but we need to talk about practical matters. Sarah's business, the house, the investments, everything will need to be managed properly. I think it's best if I handle all of that. You shouldn't burden yourself with financial stress at your age." At my age, the phrase hit me like a slap. This man, who had contributed virtually nothing to Sarah's success, who had spent the last 5 years of their marriage mysteriously between jobs while she worked 16-hour days, was now trying to dismiss me as a fragile old woman who couldn't handle her own daughter's affairs. "Of course, David," I replied calmly, my decades of courtroom experience kicking in. "We'll let the lawyers sort everything out according to Sarah's wishes." His smile faltered for just a moment. "Well, naturally, as her husband, I'm her primary beneficiary. That's how these things work." That night, alone in my apartment, I sat in Sarah's favorite chair, the one she'd given me for my 60th birthday, and thought about the conversation I had with her just 6 weeks before she died. She had seemed anxious, almost secretive, mentioning that she had been updating some important documents and that she needed to tell me something crucial. But then her work crisis had erupted, and we never had that conversation. Now, as I stared at the sympathy cards piling up on my coffee table, I realized that Sarah had been trying to protect me from something. And whatever it was, David clearly believed he had already won. The lawyer's office was scheduled for Thursday morning. David had insisted on driving me there, playing the role of the caring son-in-law to perfection. As we sat in traffic, he chatted casually about his plans for Sarah's assets, how he intended to sell the house and invest the money more wisely. "I'm thinking of moving to Florida," he mentioned offhandedly. "Fresh start, you know. Of course, I'll make sure you're taken care of, Margaret. Maybe a nice assisted living facility. Nothing too expensive, but comfortable." Assisted living facility. At 63, the man was already planning to warehouse me away while he enjoyed my daughter's fortune. But as we walked into the law office of Harrison, Mitchell & Associates, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. Because David had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He had never bothered to learn about Sarah's relationship with her mother. He had never understood that my daughter and I didn't just share blood. We shared a strategic mind that had been forged by decades of legal battles. The receptionist led us into a conference room where Mr. Harrison, Sarah's attorney, was waiting with a thick manila folder. David sat confidently at the head of the table, already assuming the position of the primary beneficiary. I took the chair beside him, my hands folded calmly in my lap, every instinct from my legal career telling me that something significant was about to unfold. "Before we begin," Mr. Harrison said, adjusting his glasses, "I want you both to know that Sarah came to see me 5 weeks before her death. She made some very specific changes to her will, and she was quite insistent about certain provisions." David's confident smile never wavered. "Of course. Sarah was always thorough about business matters." Mr. Harrison opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "Actually, Mr. Williams, I think you'll find these provisions quite unexpected." That was the moment I knew my daughter had been protecting me all along. And as Mr. Harrison prepared to read the will that would change everything, I caught David's eye across the table and smiled. He had no idea what was coming. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading in his steady, professional voice. "I, Sarah Elizabeth Williams, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils and declare this to be my last will and testament." David leaned forward slightly, his fingers drumming confidently on the mahogany table. I could practically see him calculating numbers in his head. The house worth $800,000, Sarah's business valued at over $2 million, her investment portfolio that he assumed would set him up for life. "To my husband, David Michael Williams," Mr. Harrison continued, "I leave the sum of $50,000 and my personal vehicle, a 2022 Honda Accord." The silence in the room was deafening. David's face went completely blank, as if his brain couldn't process what he had just heard. "I'm sorry. What?" David's voice cracked slightly. "50,000? There must be some mistake." Mr. Harrison looked up from the document with the expression of a man who had delivered shocking news many times before. "There's no mistake, Mr. Williams. Shall I continue?" I felt my heart rate accelerate, not from shock, but from a growing sense of vindication. My brilliant daughter had seen right through the man she had married. "To my beloved mother, Margaret Louise Thompson," Mr. Harrison continued, "I leave my entire business, Thompson Williams Tech Solutions, valued at approximately $2.8 million as of the date of this will. I also leave her my investment portfolio, currently valued at $1.4 million, my home at 15 Oak Ridge Drive, and all contents therein, as well as the family farm property in Millbrook County that she may not be aware I purchased, valued at approximately $700,000. The numbers were staggering. My daughter had been far more successful than even I had realized, and she had left virtually everything to me. But David's reaction was what made this moment truly unforgettable. "This is impossible." David shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We were married for 12 years. I have rights. This will is obviously invalid. Sarah would never do this to me." Mr. Harrison remained perfectly calm. "Actually, Mr. Williams, there's more. Sarah also included a letter to be read aloud in the event of her death. Would you like me to continue?" David slumped back into his chair, his face pale and sweaty. I had seen this exact expression before, in courtrooms when opposing counsel realized they had completely underestimated their opponent. "Please do," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside me. Mr. Harrison pulled out a sealed envelope, opened it carefully, and began to read in Sarah's own words. "If you are hearing this, it means I am gone, and both Mom and David are learning about my final decisions. David, if you are surprised by this will, then you proved exactly what I suspected about your true intentions." The letter continued, but I was watching David's face transform from confusion to panic to something approaching rage. His hands were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. I discovered 6 months ago that David had been systematically researching the value of my assets, had spoken with divorce attorneys about protecting his interests, and had even gone so far as to have my business evaluated by a firm in Chicago without my knowledge or consent. David's head snapped up. "She was spying on me." "She was protecting herself," I said calmly, speaking for the first time since we had entered the office, something I taught her to do from a very young age. Mr. Harrison continued reading. "Mom, I know this comes as a shock, but I have been planning this for months. The farm in Millbrook County is the property where you and Dad had your first date. I bought it last year as a surprise for your retirement. The business has been structured so that you can either run it yourself with the management team I've put in place or sell it for full value. Either way, you'll be financially secure for the rest of your life. The farm where my husband and I had our first date. I remembered it perfectly. A beautiful property with rolling hills and a small lake where Robert had proposed to me 40 years ago. Sarah had never forgotten the stories I told her about that magical place. Even in death, my daughter was taking care of me in ways I never could have imagined. But David was having a complete breakdown. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of supporting her career, of being there for her, and this is how she repays me? $50,000? That's not even enough for a down payment on a decent house. Actually, Mr. Harrison interjected, consulting another document, there's one more provision. Sarah also requested that I inform you, Mr. Williams, that she was aware of your affair with Jennifer Morrison from your gym, which began approximately 8 months ago. She hired a private investigator who documented your activities quite thoroughly. The affair. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. David's frequent workouts that lasted 3 hours, his sudden interest in improving his appearance, his emotional distance from Sarah in the months before her death. My daughter had known everything. David's face went from pale to red to purple. That's a lie. Sarah was paranoid. She was always suspicious of everyone. The investigator's report is quite detailed, Mr. Harrison continued matter-of-factly, including photographs, credit card receipts from hotels, and recorded phone conversations. Sarah felt that this evidence justified her decision to leave you the minimum amount required by law. I realized in that moment that my daughter had been fighting a war I didn't even know existed. While I had been worrying about her working too many hours, she had been dealing with a cheating husband who was planning to divorce her and take half of everything she had built. David suddenly turned to me with desperate eyes. Margaret, you can't let this stand. I'm family. I was Sarah's husband. You know she would have wanted me to be taken care of. This will, it's the product of a sick mind. We can fight this together. The audacity was breathtaking. This man had just been exposed as an adulterer and a gold digger, and he was now trying to manipulate me into sharing my inheritance with him. David, I said calmly, drawing on every ounce of courtroom composure I had developed over 4 decades. My daughter was one of the most intelligent, careful, and strategic people I've ever known. If she made these decisions, she had excellent reasons for them. But I have nothing, he shouted. $50,000 won't last me 2 years. Then I suggest you find a job, I replied. I believe that's what most people do when they need money. Mr. Harrison looked between us and cleared his throat. There are a few more administrative matters to discuss, but the basic distribution is clear. Mrs. Thompson, you are now the sole owner of a substantial estate. Mr. Williams, you have 30 days to vacate the house at Oak Ridge Drive, as specified in the will. 30 days. Sarah had even thought of that detail. She had given David just enough time to pack his belongings, but not enough time to cause damage or steal anything valuable. As we left the lawyer's office, David walked slightly ahead of me, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But I could see the tension in his body, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching. This wasn't over. Men like David didn't accept defeat gracefully, especially when millions of dollars were involved. When we reached his car, he turned to me with eyes full of calculation. Margaret, I hope you know that I'll be consulting with my own attorney about this. There are laws about spousal rights. This will might not be as ironclad as that lawyer thinks. And there it was, the threat I had been expecting. David wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night. He was going to fight, and he was going to make it ugly. But as I looked at this man who had cheated on my daughter and planned to steal from both of us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of battle. Because David had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He thought he was dealing with a grieving mother who could be intimidated. He had no idea he was about to go to war with someone who had spent 40 years destroying people exactly like him in courtrooms across the state. 3 days after the will reading, David made his first move. I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing Sarah's business documents that Mr. Harrison had delivered, when my phone rang. Mrs. Thompson, This is James Mackenzie from Mackenzie & Associates. I represent David Williams in the matter of your daughter's estate. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss a potential settlement. Settlement. The word every experienced litigator knows is code for, we think we can intimidate you into giving us money we're not entitled to. Mr. Mackenzie, I replied calmly, I'm represented by Harrison, Mitchell & Associates. You'll need to contact them directly. Actually, Mrs. Thompson, I think it would be in everyone's best interest if we could resolve this matter quickly and quietly, without the expense and emotional trauma of lengthy litigation. There it was, the classic intimidation tactic. Make the opponent believe that fighting will be more costly and painful than just giving in. I had used this approach myself countless times, but I had never been on the receiving end from someone so transparently amateur. Mr. Mackenzie, I spent 4 decades in litigation. If you're calling me directly instead of going through my attorney, it tells me that your case is weaker than you're pretending it is. Have a good day. I hung up and immediately called Mr. Harrison. They're going to fight, I told him, and they're starting with intimidation tactics. I expected as much, he replied. Sarah warned me this might happen. She said David would never accept losing, especially not to you. But Margaret, there's something else. Sarah left specific instructions for me to give you additional information if David contested the will. What kind of information? The kind that explains exactly why she made the decision she made. Can you come in tomorrow morning? And Margaret, you might want to prepare yourself. What Sarah discovered about David goes much deeper than adultery. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since retiring. I opened a legal investigation. I called Patricia Rodriguez, the best private investigator I had ever worked with, someone who had helped me win dozens of cases over the years. Patricia, I need your help with a family matter. It's complicated and it might get ugly. Margaret Thompson calling in favors? This must be serious. What do you need? I explained the situation. Sarah's death, the will, David's reaction, and the lawyer's hints about deeper secrets. Give me 72 hours, Patricia said. I'll tell you everything there is to know about David Williams. And Margaret, if your daughter hired her own investigator, I want to see that file too. Professional investigators tend to uncover things that family members miss. The next morning, Mr. Harrison's office felt different, more serious somehow, as if the walls themselves were preparing for battle. He had Sarah's complete file spread across his conference table, not just the will, but boxes of documents, photographs, and reports. Margaret, your daughter came to see me 7 months before she died. She didn't just update her will, she launched a complete investigation into her husband's activities. What she found was systematic financial fraud that goes back almost 3 years. He handed me a thick folder marked, Confidential Sarah Williams Investigation. David wasn't just having an affair. He was stealing from her business, manipulating her personal accounts, and had even forged her signature on several loan applications. Sarah discovered that he had diverted nearly $200,000 from company accounts into investments under his own name. $200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. He was robbing her blind. It gets worse. David had also been selling proprietary information from Sarah's tech company to competitors. She found email evidence of him passing along client lists, pricing strategies, and development plans to at least 3 rival firms. Industrial espionage, corporate theft. This wasn't just a cheating husband. This was a criminal who had been systematically destroying my daughter's business from the inside. Mr. Harrison continued. Sarah spent months documenting everything. She hired forensic accountants, computer specialists, and investigators. She was building a case not just for divorce, but for criminal prosecution. Then why didn't she act on it? She was going to. Sarah had an appointment with the district attorney's office scheduled for the week after she died. She was going to file charges for theft, fraud, and industrial espionage, but she wanted to make sure you were protected first, which is why she changed her will. I stared at the photographs scattered across the table, images of David meeting with competitors, bank records showing unauthorized transfers, copies of emails where he discussed selling Sarah's business secrets. My daughter had been living with a criminal, and she had died before she could bring him to justice. Mr. Harrison, does David know that Sarah had gathered all this evidence? No. Sarah was very careful to keep the investigation secret. As far as David knows, she only discovered the affair. He has no idea that she documented his financial crimes. That evening, Patricia called with her preliminary report. Margaret, your son-in-law is even worse than you think. I've found evidence of him running the same con on at least 2 other women before Sarah. He targets successful professional women, marries them, gains access to their assets, and then systematically loots their finances. You mean this was planned from the beginning? I think David saw Sarah as his retirement plan. She was young, successful, trusting, and had no family except you. He probably figured he could control the situation for years, but your daughter was smarter than he gave her credit for. I spent that night reading through Sarah's investigation files, and with each document, my admiration for my daughter grew. She had been methodical, professional, and absolutely thorough. She had documented everything with the precision of someone who understood exactly how legal cases are won. But she had also been terrified. I found a handwritten note tucked into the file. Mom, if something happens to me, make sure David doesn't get away with this. He's dangerous and he's done this before. I love you. S. Dangerous. The word sent chills down my spine. Had Sarah suspected that David might actually harm her? Her heart attack had been sudden, unexpected, with no prior symptoms. The doctors had said it was a rare condition in someone so young, but not impossible. I pushed that thought away. I couldn't go down that path without evidence, but what I could do was ensure that David faced consequences for the crimes I could prove. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison with a decision that felt like putting on armor I hadn't worn in years. I want to file criminal charges against David Williams. I want him prosecuted for every theft, every forgery, every act of industrial espionage that Sarah documented. And I want to make sure he knows that this war he's starting isn't just about the will. It's about justice for my daughter. Margaret, are you sure? This will make the probate fight much more complicated. David will fight back hard. Let him fight, I replied, feeling more like myself than I had in months. He stole from my daughter. He betrayed her trust. He destroyed her peace of mind in the last months of her life. And now he's trying to steal from me. I paused, thinking about Sarah's note, about the fear she must have felt living with a man she knew was systematically destroying everything she had built. Mr. Harrison, I didn't spend 4 decades in courtrooms to back down from a fight with a 2-bit con artist. David Williams picked the wrong family to victimize. As I hung up the phone, I realized that something fundamental had changed in me. For the first time since Sarah's funeral, I wasn't just grieving, I was planning. And David, wherever he was right now, probably thought he was dealing with a broken-hearted grandmother who would cave under pressure. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. Patricia Rodriguez arrived at my apartment the following Tuesday morning, carrying 2 briefcases and wearing the expression of someone who had uncovered something truly explosive. I had worked with Patricia for 15 years, and I had never seen her look quite so grim. Margaret, sit down. What I'm about to show you is going to change everything you thought you knew about David Williams. She opened the first briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. David Williams isn't even his real name. He was born David Michael Kowalski in Detroit, Michigan. He's been using false identities for at least 12 years, and Sarah wasn't his first victim. She was his fourth victim. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean, fourth? Patricia spread photographs across my coffee table, pictures of 3 different women, all successful professionals, all between the ages of 28 and 35 when they met David. Rebecca Martinez, software engineer in Austin, Texas, married David in 2010. Within 18 months, he had drained her accounts and disappeared. She lost her house, her business, everything. She pointed to the next photo. Jennifer Walsh, marketing executive in Denver, married him in 2013 under the name David Mitchell. Same pattern, systematic financial abuse. Then he vanished. Jennifer had to file for bankruptcy. The third photo showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. And this is the one that's going to break your heart, Margaret. Dr. Lisa Chen, a pediatric cardiologist in Seattle. She married David Williams, yes, he was already using that name, in 2016. 6 months after the wedding, Lisa died in what appeared to be an accidental overdose of her own heart medication. My blood ran cold. Appeared to be? The investigation was closed quickly. Lisa had access to the medication. She had been under stress from work. And David played the grieving widower perfectly. But here's what the police didn't know. David had taken out a life insurance policy on Lisa just 3 months before her death. A policy worth $800,000. I felt the room spinning slightly. Are you suggesting that David— I'm not suggesting anything that can't be proven in court. But I will say this. Dr. Lisa Chen had no history of depression, no financial problems, no reason to take her own life, and according to her medical records, she was extremely careful about medication dosages. She was, after all, a cardiologist. Patricia opened the second briefcase. And that brings us to Sarah. Margaret, I need to ask you a difficult question. Did Sarah ever mention feeling unwell in the weeks before her death? Any unusual symptoms? Dizziness? Heart palpitations? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. She had mentioned feeling tired, said she was having trouble sleeping, some chest tightness she attributed to work stress, but she was only 39. The doctors said sudden cardiac events can happen to anyone. They can, but they can also be induced, especially in someone who has access to the right medications or substances. Patricia pulled out a medical file. I spoke with a forensic pathologist who reviewed Sarah's autopsy report. He said the symptoms you just described, insomnia, fatigue, chest tightness, are consistent with someone being given small doses of digitalis over several weeks. What's digitalis? It's a heart medication. In proper doses, it treats heart conditions. In excessive doses, it causes exactly the kind of cardiac event that killed your daughter. And here's the terrifying part. It's almost impossible to detect after death unless you know specifically to test for it. I stood up and walked to the window, trying to process what Patricia was telling me. Was she suggesting that David had murdered Sarah? That my daughter's death wasn't natural, but was actually— Patricia, are you saying that David killed Sarah? I'm saying the pattern is suspicious enough that the authorities need to take a serious look at it. 3 successful women, all married to the same man using different identities, all dying or disappearing after he gained access to their assets. That's not coincidence. That's a serial predator. I felt rage building in my chest, a fury unlike anything I had ever experienced. If David had killed my daughter, if he had murdered Sarah for money, then this wasn't just about inheritance disputes and financial fraud. This was about justice for a crime that had destroyed my entire world. What do we do now? Patricia pulled out her phone. I've already contacted Detective Maria Santos with the state police. She specializes in financial crimes and has experience with serial fraud cases. She wants to meet with us tomorrow morning. But Margaret, I need to warn you, if we pursue this, David is going to realize that we know much more than he thinks we do. He might run, or he might become dangerous. I don't care. If that monster killed my daughter, I want him in prison for the rest of his life. That afternoon, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, my former colleague, District Attorney Robert Henley. Robert and I had worked together on dozens of complex financial crimes cases, and if anyone could help me navigate the intersection of criminal prosecution and civil litigation, it was him. Margaret, I was so sorry to hear about Sarah. How are you holding up? Actually, Robert, that's why I'm calling. I think Sarah might have been murdered. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted nearly 10 seconds. Margaret, that's a very serious allegation. What evidence do you have? I spent 20 minutes outlining everything Patricia had discovered. The false identities, the pattern of victimization, the suspicious deaths, the financial fraud. Robert listened without interruption, asking only occasionally for clarification. Jesus, Margaret, if even half of this is accurate, you're dealing with a serial killer who uses marriage as his weapon. I can fast-track this investigation, but I need you to understand something. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. If David realizes we're closing in on him, he might disappear forever. Then we make sure he doesn't realize it until it's too late. What do you mean? Robert, David thinks he's fighting a probate dispute with a grieving widow. He has no idea that I know about his real identity, his criminal history, or the pattern of deaths. Let him keep thinking this is just about Sarah's will. Meanwhile, we build the criminal case quietly. You want to use the civil litigation as cover for the criminal investigation? Exactly. David will be so focused on trying to overturn Sarah's will that he won't notice the real trap closing around him. And Robert, I want to be involved in every step of this investigation. This isn't just professional for me, it's personal. That evening I sat in Sarah's favorite chair and thought about the conversation I wish I could have with my daughter. I wanted to tell her how proud I was of her for documenting David's crimes, how smart she had been to protect me with her will, and how sorry I was that I hadn't seen the danger she was living with every day. But mostly, I wanted to promise her that David Williams, or David Kowalski, or whatever his real name was, would pay for what he had done. Not just the financial crimes, not just the betrayal of her trust, but for the ultimate violation of taking her life. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed David's number. "Margaret, I hope you've had time to reconsider the situation. My attorney thinks we can reach a reasonable settlement. Maybe split the estate 60-40 in your favor. That would give you plenty to live on. And I could start rebuilding my life." The audacity was breathtaking. This man, who I now suspected of murdering my daughter, was calling to negotiate for millions of dollars from her estate. "David, as I mentioned before, all communications need to go through my attorney. Margaret, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I know you're hurting, but Sarah wouldn't have wanted us to fight like this. She would have wanted her family to take care of each other." Family. He was still pretending to be family while potentially being my daughter's killer. "You're right, David. Sarah would have wanted her family to be protected. That's exactly what I intend to do." After I hung up, I realized that David had just made a crucial mistake. He had called me directly, despite being told to go through attorneys. That suggested desperation, which meant the $50,000 Sarah had left him wasn't going to last as long as he had hoped. Desperate men make careless mistakes. And I was about to give David Williams every opportunity to make the mistakes that would finally bring him to justice. If you've ever wondered whether justice can truly be served when powerful people think they can destroy ordinary families, subscribe and follow my story. Because what happened next proved that sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. Detective Maria Santos was exactly what I had hoped for. Sharp, experienced, and utterly professional. When we met at the state police headquarters that Wednesday morning, she had already begun her own preliminary investigation based on Patricia's report. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been working financial crimes for 18 years, and I've never seen a case quite like this. Your son-in-law appears to be what we call a black widow criminal, someone who systematically targets and destroys intimate partners for financial gain." She opened a thick case file on the conference table. "Based on Ms. Rodriguez's investigation, we've identified at least 4 victims across 3 states. But here's what concerns me most. The timeline is accelerating. The gaps between victims are getting shorter, and the methods are becoming more sophisticated." Detective Santos pulled out a timeline chart. Rebecca Martinez in Austin, 2010 to 2012. Jennifer Walsh in Denver, 2013 to 2015. Dr. Lisa Chen in Seattle, 2016 to 2017. And then Sarah, 2018 to 2024. "He's not just getting bolder, he's getting better at it." Patricia leaned forward. "Detective, what about the insurance policies? Did he take out policies on all the victims?" "That's where it gets interesting. Rebecca and Jennifer both survived, so there were no insurance claims. But with Dr. Chen, he collected $800,000. And with Sarah," Detective Santos pulled out another document. "Mrs. Thompson, were you aware that David had taken out a life insurance policy on your daughter?" My heart stopped. "What policy?" "A $2 million term life insurance policy. It was purchased 13 months ago, and David paid all the premiums in advance. He filed the claim 3 days after Sarah's funeral. $2 million, on top of what he thought he would inherit from Sarah's estate. David had been planning to collect over $4 million from my daughter's death." "Detective," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "what do you need from me to build a case against him?" "Actually, Mrs. Thompson, I need you to continue exactly what you're already doing. Let David think this is just a probate dispute. Meanwhile, we're going to quietly build a criminal case that will destroy him completely." Detective Santos explained the strategy. While David focused on fighting Sarah's will in civil court, the criminal investigation would work in parallel. They would re-examine Dr. Lisa Chen's death, investigate the financial crimes against all 4 victims, and most importantly, take a much closer look at the circumstances of Sarah's cardiac event. I've already spoken with the medical examiner who performed Sarah's autopsy. He's agreed to run additional toxicology tests on tissue samples that were preserved. If someone was poisoning your daughter with digitalis or other cardiac medications, we'll find evidence of it. As we left the police station, Patricia grabbed my arm. Margaret, there's something else. Something I didn't want to mention in front of the detective until I was absolutely certain. What is it? I've been tracking David's movements in the weeks before Sarah died. According to his credit card records, he made several purchases at medical supply companies. Specifically, he bought equipment used for extracting and concentrating plant-based compounds. What kind of plants? Foxglove. It's the natural source of digitalis. Margaret, I think David was manufacturing his own poison. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't just killed Sarah. He had planned it meticulously, researching methods, acquiring materials, and then slowly poisoning my daughter over weeks or months. That afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call from someone who identified herself as Amanda Foster. Mrs. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from a mutual friend. I understand you're dealing with some difficulties involving David Williams. I'm sorry, who are you? I was married to David, before Sarah. I was Jennifer Walsh then, but I've since remarried and changed my name. Ms. Rodriguez contacted me about your situation, and I think we need to talk. Jennifer Walsh, the marketing executive from Denver who had lost everything to David's financial manipulations. She was alive, and she wanted to help. We met the next day at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Jennifer was a composed, intelligent woman in her early 40s, but I could see the wariness in her eyes, the look of someone who had learned to be suspicious of everyone. Mrs. Thompson, I want to start by saying how sorry I am about Sarah. When I heard what happened to her, and then learned about the similarities to Dr. Chen's death, I've been carrying guilt about not speaking up sooner. What do you mean? I suspected David was dangerous when our marriage ended. The way he manipulated finances, the psychological abuse, the threats he made when I tried to leave, it all pointed to someone capable of much worse than theft. But I was afraid, and I convinced myself I was overreacting. Jennifer pulled out a folder of documents. I've kept records of everything David did to me. The forged signatures, the unauthorized loans, the way he systematically isolated me from friends and family. But there's something else, something that might be crucial to Sarah's case. She handed me a medical report. In the last 3 months of our marriage, I started having health problems, dizziness, fatigue, irregular heartbeat. My doctor ran dozens of tests, but couldn't find anything wrong. The symptoms disappeared completely within 2 weeks of David moving out. You think he was poisoning you too? I'm certain of it. But back then, I didn't know what to look for, and I was too focused on just surviving the divorce. It wasn't until I heard about Sarah's cardiac event that I realized what David had probably been doing. Jennifer's testimony would be crucial evidence if the case went to trial. Here was a pattern of behavior spanning multiple victims, showing David's evolution from financial predator to potential killer. But she had more revelations. Mrs. Thompson, there's something else you need to know about David's methods. He doesn't work alone. What do you mean? David has a partner, a woman named Monica Stevens, who helps him identify and research potential victims. She posed as my friend during my marriage, gathering information about my finances and vulnerabilities. I think she did the same thing with Dr. Chen, and probably with Sarah too. Monica Stevens. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I remembered Sarah mentioning a new friend she had made at her gym, a woman who had been incredibly interested in Sarah's business success and family situation. Jennifer, do you have any information about this Monica person? Some. She's approximately 50 years old, very sophisticated, presents herself as a wealthy widow. She targets women through upscale gyms, professional networking events, charity functions. She gains their trust, learns their secrets, and then passes that information to David. A criminal partnership. David wasn't just a lone predator. He was part of a team that had been systematically targeting successful women for years. That evening, I called Detective Santos with Jennifer's information. The investigation was expanding rapidly, but so was the danger. If David and Monica realized how much we knew, they might disappear before we could arrest them. Detective, how long do we have before you can make arrests? I need at least 2 more weeks to coordinate with law enforcement in the other states and to get the additional toxicology results on Sarah. But Mrs. Thompson, I'm worried about your safety. If David suspects we're building a criminal case, I can take care of myself, I assured her. I've been dealing with dangerous people my entire career. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that this was different. David wasn't just a white-collar criminal or a corporate fraudster. He was someone who had killed at least 2 women, and possibly more. And if he felt cornered, there was no telling what he might do next. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop digging into things that don't concern you. Some secrets should stay buried. The threat was clear. David knew we were investigating him. The war was about to begin in earnest. The threatening text message changed everything. Within 12 hours of receiving it, my apartment had been equipped with a sophisticated security system, courtesy of Detective Santos and the state police. Patricia had also arranged for discreet surveillance. I was never truly alone, even when I appeared to be. But more importantly, the threat told us that David was getting desperate, which meant he was about to make mistakes. Margaret, Detective Santos explained during our emergency meeting, criminals like David are most dangerous when they feel cornered, but they're also most likely to expose themselves. We're going to use his desperation against him. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would continue fighting the probate case publicly, making David believe that was my only concern. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation would intensify, but completely out of sight. And to make David even more reckless, we were going to dangle bait he couldn't resist. What kind of bait? I asked. Detective Santos smiled grimly. Money, lots of it. The strategy was to let David believe he had found a way to access Sarah's fortune despite the will. Patricia would pose as a corrupt financial consultant who specialized in helping people circumvent estate restrictions. She would approach David's attorney with a proposal that seemed too good to be true, because it was. David will think he's found a way to steal millions from you, Patricia explained. But actually, he'll be providing us with evidence of conspiracy, attempted fraud, and violation of court orders. Every conversation will be recorded, every document will be evidence. The trap required perfect timing. While David was being lured into committing new crimes, the investigation into Sarah's death was reaching a critical phase. The additional toxicology tests were due back in 5 days, and Detective Santos had been coordinating with Seattle police to re-examine Dr. Lisa Chen's case. But the most crucial element was Monica Stevens. Jennifer Walsh had provided enough information for Patricia to track down David's partner, and what they discovered was terrifying. Monica Stevens was a professional criminal who had been running marriage scams for over 15 years. She had helped at least 12 different men target and destroy wealthy women, taking a percentage of the profits from each victim. But her partnership with David was different, more sophisticated, more violent, and far more lucrative. Monica is the strategist, Detective Santos explained. She identifies targets, develops psychological profiles, and creates detailed plans for how to manipulate each victim. David is the executor. He does the actual seduction, marriage, and ultimately the killing. The police had found evidence that Monica had been researching me since Sarah's funeral. She knew about my legal background, my financial resources, and even my daily routines. They had been planning something, and the threatening text message suggested their timeline was accelerating. Detective, are you saying they might target me next? It's possible. With Sarah gone and the will cutting David out of her fortune, you've become the obstacle between him and millions of dollars. From his perspective, if something happened to you, he might be able to challenge the estate as Sarah's surviving spouse. The thought was chilling, but it also presented an opportunity. If we could catch David and Monica planning to harm me, it would provide the evidence needed to charge them with conspiracy to commit murder. I want to be the bait, I told Detective Santos. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Detective, I've been handling dangerous situations my entire career, and more importantly, this is personal. These people killed my daughter. I want to be the one who brings them down. After considerable discussion, we developed a modified plan. I would continue my normal routines, but with extensive surveillance and protection. If David and Monica made a move against me, the police would be ready. But I would also be proactive, using my legal skills to pressure David in ways that would force him to reveal his true nature. The next morning, I called David directly, knowing the conversation would be recorded by both the police and his own attorney. David, I've been thinking about our situation, and I want to make you an offer. What kind of offer? His voice was cautious but hopeful. I'm 63 years old, and I never expected to inherit a business empire. Managing Sarah's company is overwhelming, and frankly, I'm not sure I want the responsibility. What if we could find a way to work together? The silence on the other end lasted nearly 10 seconds. I could practically hear David's mind racing, trying to figure out if this was a trap or an opportunity. What exactly are you proposing, Margaret? Meet me for lunch tomorrow. Just the two of us. Let's see if we can find a solution that honors Sarah's memory while being practical about our futures. David agreed immediately, confirming what we had suspected. His $50,000 was running out faster than expected, and he was desperate for access to Sarah's money. That evening, Detective Santos briefed me on the surveillance plan for the lunch meeting. Margaret, David will probably be wearing a wire, hoping to get you to say something that helps his probate case. But we'll be recording everything too, and we're hoping he'll reveal information about his criminal activities. What if he brings Monica? He won't. This meeting is about testing whether you're vulnerable to manipulation. Monica will stay in the background, but our surveillance team will be watching for her. The lunch meeting was scheduled for noon at an upscale restaurant downtown, public enough to feel safe, but quiet enough for private conversation. I spent the morning reviewing everything we knew about David's psychological profile, his methods of manipulation, and his patterns of behavior. Jennifer Walsh had provided crucial insights into how David operated. He's incredibly charming when he thinks he's winning, she had warned me. But watch his eyes. When David is planning something violent, his eyes change. They become flat, emotionless, like a shark's. As I prepared for what might be the most important performance of my life, I thought about Sarah. My daughter had been building evidence against David for months before her death, knowing that her life was in danger but determined to protect me and bring him to justice. Now it was my turn to finish what she had started. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, taking a table where I could observe the entrance. Detective Santos had assured me that at least 6 undercover officers would be positioned throughout the restaurant and surrounding area. I was protected, but I was also the bait in a trap that could either destroy David Williams or expose me to mortal danger. At exactly noon, David walked through the entrance, and I was struck by how different he looked. Gone was the confident, arrogant man from Sarah's funeral. He appeared nervous, slightly desperate, scanning the room as if looking for threats. But when he spotted me and smiled, I saw exactly what Jennifer had warned me about. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely without empathy. David Williams wasn't just a criminal. He was a predator who saw me as his next victim. The final phase of our battle was about to begin. David approached the table with what he probably thought was a charming smile, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. This was a man who had perfected the art of deception over years of victimizing women, and he was about to deploy every weapon in his arsenal. Margaret, you look wonderful. I'm so glad you called. Sarah would be happy to see us trying to work things out like family. Family. He used that word like a shield, as if invoking Sarah's memory could somehow erase the fact that he had likely murdered her. Please, sit down, David. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the will reading. He settled into the chair across from me, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning the restaurant. Professional paranoia, the mark of someone who had been running criminal operations long enough to develop survival instincts. Margaret, I have to admit, I was surprised by your call. After our last conversation, I thought you were determined to fight me. Fighting is exhausting, David, and expensive. I'm not 25 anymore. I don't have the energy for prolonged legal battles. I watched his face carefully as I spoke. The slight relaxation around his eyes told me he was buying the performance. David Williams thought he was sitting across from a tired, grieving widow who was ready to capitulate. You know, he continued, leaning forward slightly, I've been thinking about Sarah's business. It's a complicated company to run, lots of technical aspects that require specialized knowledge. Maybe we could structure some kind of partnership where I help manage the day-to-day operations. There it was, his first real move. David was positioning himself to gain control of Sarah's company, probably planning to loot it the same way he had stolen from her while she was alive. That's an interesting idea, I replied carefully. But wouldn't that be complicated legally? I mean, with the will being so specific about leaving everything to me? David's smile became more confident. Actually, I've been consulting with some specialists who handle complex estate situations. There are ways to restructure inheritances for tax purposes, or to ensure better management of business assets. The key is having the right advisors. Specialists. He was talking about Monica Stevens and whatever network of corrupt professionals they worked with. This was exactly what Detective Santos had hoped for. David was offering to introduce me to his criminal associates. What kind of specialists? I asked, playing the role of an overwhelmed widow who needed guidance. Well, there's this consultant I know, Monica Stevens. She's helped other families navigate complicated estate situations. Very discreet, very professional. She understands that sometimes the legal system doesn't produce the most practical solutions for families. Perfect. David was handing us Monica Stevens on a silver platter, and he had no idea he was being recorded. David, I have to ask you something directly. Are you suggesting that we find ways to work around Sarah's will? His hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was long enough to confirm what we already suspected. Margaret, I'm suggesting that we find creative solutions that honor Sarah's intentions while being realistic about practical management. Sarah was brilliant, but she made those decisions when she was emotional, possibly not thinking clearly about the long-term implications. Emotional, not thinking clearly. He was already laying the groundwork to challenge Sarah's mental state when she wrote the will, a strategy that might work against a typical grieving parent, but would backfire spectacularly against someone with my legal background. You know what troubles me most, David? Sarah seemed so anxious in her last months, almost frightened sometimes. I keep wondering what she was dealing with. For just a moment, David's mask slipped. His eyes flashed with something that might have been guilt or fear or simply calculation about how to respond. Sarah was under a lot of pressure with the business, and she had been having some health issues, irregular heartbeat, fatigue. I kept encouraging her to see a cardiologist, but she was too busy to take care of herself properly. Health issues. He was actually admitting to knowledge of the symptoms that preceded her death. If Sarah had been slowly poisoned with digitalis, those were exactly the symptoms she would have experienced. It's tragic that someone so young could have a heart attack, I said, watching his reaction carefully. It really is. But these things happen, especially to people who work too hard and don't manage stress well. Sarah pushed herself relentlessly. David was building a narrative that portrayed Sarah's death as the predictable result of overwork and stress, deflecting any suspicion that it might have been caused by external factors. I decided to push further. David, I need to ask you about something that's been bothering me. A few people have mentioned that you and Sarah seem to be having some difficulties in your marriage. His face hardened slightly. Every marriage has its challenges, Margaret. Sarah and I were working through some issues, but we loved each other. Anyone who suggests otherwise didn't really know our relationship. Of course, it's just that Sarah mentioned something about trust issues, problems with finances. Sarah had become paranoid in her last months, David interrupted, his voice carrying a sharp edge for the first time. She started questioning everything, seeing conspiracies where none existed. Honestly, I was worried about her mental state. There it was, the defense strategy he would use if criminal charges were filed. David was planning to portray Sarah as mentally unstable, paranoid, and unreliable. It was a classic abuser's tactic, and it confirmed everything the psychological profile had suggested about his methods. But David had just made a crucial mistake. He had revealed knowledge of Sarah's suspicions about him, which meant he knew she had been investigating his activities. That information would be crucial evidence in the criminal case. David, this conversation has been very helpful. I think I would like to meet this consultant you mentioned, Monica Stevens. When could you arrange an introduction? His relief was palpable. I'm sure Monica would be happy to meet with you. She's very good at explaining complex financial strategies in terms that are easy to understand. Should I set something up for this week? That would be perfect. As we finished lunch, David seemed more relaxed and confident than I had seen him since Sarah's funeral. He thought he was close to gaining access to millions of dollars, and he had no idea that every word of our conversation had been recorded by law enforcement. But as we stood to leave, David placed his hand on my arm in what appeared to be a gesture of familial affection. Margaret, I want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to work together on this. Sarah would be proud of us for putting family first. When he touched me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear, but fury. This man, who had almost certainly murdered my daughter, was now touching me while speaking about family and Sarah's pride. But I maintained my composure, smiled, and thanked him for lunch. As David left the restaurant, I remained at the table for a few more minutes, ostensibly checking my phone, but actually allowing Detective Santos and her team time to coordinate their surveillance of David's next moves. 20 minutes later, Patricia called with an update. "Margaret, he took the bait completely. David called Monica Stevens from his car and told her to prepare a presentation for the grieving mother who was ready to restructure the inheritance. They're planning to meet with you Friday afternoon." And Detective Santos? She's ecstatic. "We now have recorded evidence of David offering to help you circumvent a legal will, mentioning his knowledge of Sarah's health symptoms before her death, and arranging for you to meet with Monica Stevens. Plus, the surveillance team photographed him making the call to Monica immediately after leaving the restaurant, Friday afternoon. In less than 3 days, I would be sitting across from the woman who had helped plan my daughter's murder. But this time, I wouldn't be playing the role of a vulnerable widow. I would be the trap that finally brought them both to justice. The meeting with Monica Stevens was scheduled for Friday at 3 o'clock in the conference room of a downtown office building. The location itself was suspicious. A generic business center where anyone could rent space by the hour, leaving no paper trail connecting Monica to any legitimate enterprise. Detective Santos had spent 2 days preparing for what she called the most complex surveillance operation I've ever coordinated. The office building would be filled with undercover officers. The conference room would be wired with audio and video equipment, and I would be wearing a nearly invisible recording device. "Margaret, I need you to understand something," Detective Santos explained during our final briefing. "Monica Stevens is significantly more dangerous than David. She's been running criminal operations for 15 years, and she's never been arrested. She's smart, paranoid, and absolutely ruthless." Patricia added her own warnings. "I've been researching Monica's background, and what I found is terrifying. She's not just a con artist, she's a psychopath who enjoys destroying people. The families she's targeted haven't just lost money. They've been completely annihilated. Bankruptcies, suicides, children separated from their parents. This woman treats human destruction like a sport. The plan was for me to pose as a wealthy widow who was overwhelmed by managing Sarah's estate and desperate for expert guidance. Monica would present herself as a financial consultant who specialized in creative estate restructuring, code words for helping people circumvent legal restrictions on inheritances. The key, Detective Santos explained, is to get Monica to explain her methods on tape. We need her to detail exactly how she helps clients violate court orders, forge documents, and steal money from legitimate heirs. Once we have that evidence, we can charge her with conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. But there was another objective, one that was more personal for me. I wanted Monica to reveal details about how she and David had targeted Sarah, how they had researched my daughter's vulnerabilities, and how they had planned her murder. Thursday evening, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh. "Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to wish you luck tomorrow. I know how dangerous this is, but I also know how important it is. Monica Stevens destroyed my life, and she's done the same thing to dozens of other women. It's time someone stopped her. Jennifer, can you tell me what to expect? How does Monica operate in these meetings? She's incredibly charming at first. Sophisticated, knowledgeable, sympathetic to your situation. But watch for the moment when she thinks she has you hooked. That's when her real personality emerges. She becomes cold, calculating, almost predatory. And Margaret, don't let her get you alone. Monica has been known to drug people during meetings if she thinks it will give her an advantage. Drug people. Another layer of danger I hadn't considered. But Detective Santos had anticipated this possibility. I would be carrying a small device that would alert the surveillance team if I showed any signs of impairment. Friday morning arrived gray and rainy, which seemed appropriate for what felt like a descent into the criminal underworld. I dressed carefully in conservative business attire, projecting the image of a respectable widow who was out of her depth in complex financial matters. At 2:30, I arrived at the office building. The lobby was busy with legitimate business people, but I spotted at least 3 individuals who were obviously undercover police officers. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending to a battlefield. The conference room was generic and sterile, with a long table and chairs that had seen better days. I was early, which gave me a chance to settle my nerves and review the key points Detective Santos wanted me to cover. At exactly 3 o'clock, the door opened, and Monica Stevens walked in. She was not what I had expected. Instead of the sophisticated predator I had imagined, Monica appeared to be an elegant woman in her early 50s, impeccably dressed, with kind eyes and a warm smile. If I had met her at a charity function or professional networking event, I would have found her completely trustworthy. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry for your loss. David has told me about Sarah, and I can only imagine how difficult this time must be for you." Her voice was cultured, sympathetic, with just a hint of a southern accent that made her seem approachable and non-threatening. This was exactly how she had fooled Sarah and all the other victims. "Thank you for meeting with me, Miss Stevens. I have to admit, I'm feeling quite overwhelmed by everything I've inherited." Monica settled into the chair across from me and pulled out an expensive leather portfolio. "Please, call me Monica, and I want you to know that feeling overwhelmed is completely normal. Managing a complex estate requires specialized expertise that most people don't possess." For the next 20 minutes, Monica demonstrated exactly why she had been so successful at destroying families. She was knowledgeable about tax law, estate planning, and corporate structure. She asked insightful questions about Sarah's business and showed genuine sympathy for my situation. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the conversation began to shift. "Margaret, may I speak frankly?" Monica leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "Sometimes the legal system doesn't produce outcomes that make practical sense for families. Courts follow rigid rules that don't account for real-world complexities." "What do you mean?" "Well, for example, your daughter's will leaves you with enormous responsibilities that you may not want or be equipped to handle. But it also cuts out David, who actually has extensive knowledge of the business operations. From a practical standpoint, that doesn't serve anyone's interests." Here it was. Monica was beginning to suggest that we circumvent Sarah's explicit wishes as expressed in her legally executed will. But wouldn't changing anything require going through the courts? Monica's smile became more calculated. "Not necessarily. There are ways to restructure asset ownership that don't require court approval. Private agreements between family members, creative interpretations of existing documents, strategic transfers that accomplish your goals without challenging the will directly." That sounds complicated. It requires expertise, certainly. But Margaret, let me ask you something. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life managing a technology company? Do you want the stress, the liability, the constant demands on your time? Monica was using the same psychological manipulation techniques that had worked on Sarah and the other victims. She was identifying my vulnerabilities and offering solutions that seemed reasonable on the surface, but were actually criminal conspiracies. "What would you recommend?" Monica opened her portfolio and pulled out several documents. "I've prepared some preliminary structures that might work for your situation. The basic concept is that you would retain legal ownership of the assets, but operational control would be transferred to someone with relevant experience, like David." She slid a document across the table. "This is a management agreement that would give David authority to make business decisions while you remain the legal owner. It's completely legitimate, and it would relieve you of day-to-day responsibilities." I pretended to study the document, but what I was actually doing was memorizing the details so I could report them to Detective Santos. The management agreement was brilliantly constructed. It appeared legal on the surface, but contained clauses that would essentially transfer control of Sarah's assets to David while leaving me with all the legal liability. "Monica, this looks very comprehensive, but I have to ask, is this the kind of arrangement you helped David make with Sarah?" For just a moment, Monica's mask slipped. Her eyes became cold and calculating, and I saw the predator that Jennifer Walsh had warned me about. "I'm not sure what you mean, Margaret." "David mentioned that you had provided consulting services to help him and Sarah with some financial planning before she died." Monica recovered quickly, but I had seen enough to confirm what I already knew. This woman was absolutely involved in planning Sarah's murder. I occasionally provide consulting services to married couples who need help with complex asset management. But Margaret, I think we should focus on your current situation rather than dwelling on the past. The deflection was smooth, professional, but it contained an implicit threat. Monica was warning me not to ask too many questions about her previous relationship with David and Sarah. Of course. I'm sorry. I'm still processing everything that's happened. Monica's smile returned, but it was different now. Colder, more predatory. She thought she had successfully intimidated me into compliance. But what Monica Stevens didn't know was that every word of our conversation was being recorded by law enforcement officers who were building a criminal case that would destroy her entire operation. The trap was working perfectly. And in less than an hour, Monica would walk out of this conference room having provided enough evidence to charge her with multiple felonies. But first, I needed her to reveal the most important secret of all, exactly how she and David had murdered my daughter. Monica Stevens was becoming more confident by the minute, which was exactly what Detective Santos had predicted would happen. Criminals like Monica couldn't resist showing off their intelligence and expertise, especially when they believed they were dealing with someone they could easily manipulate. Margaret, I want you to understand that what I'm offering isn't just financial restructuring, it's peace of mind. You'll maintain legal ownership of everything Sarah left you, but you won't have the burden of actually managing any of it. She pulled out another document, this one even more complex than the first. This is a comprehensive asset management agreement. David would handle all business operations, investment decisions, and financial planning. You would receive a guaranteed monthly income of $50,000, and at the end of 5 years, you could choose to either continue the arrangement or dissolve it. $50,000 a month. It sounded generous until you realized that Sarah's estate generated approximately $200,000 monthly in revenue. Monica and David were planning to steal 3/4 of my inheritance while making me grateful for the privilege. That's a very generous offer, I said carefully. But I'm curious, have you structured similar arrangements before? Monica's eyes lit up with professional pride. Oh yes, many times. I specialize in helping families navigate complex situations where the legal distribution of assets doesn't match the practical needs of the survivors. Can you give me an example? Well, confidentiality prevents me from sharing specific details, but I recently helped a widow in Seattle whose husband had left her a medical practice she had no ability to manage. We structured an arrangement where her late husband's business partner took operational control while she retained ownership and received steady income. Dr. Lisa Chen. Monica was describing the arrangement she had made after David murdered the cardiologist in Seattle. The business partner was probably David himself, using another false identity. That sounds like an ideal solution, I replied. How did the arrangement work out? Unfortunately, the widow passed away about 18 months later. Natural causes. She had heart problems. But the arrangement had provided her with financial security during her final months. Natural causes, heart problems. Monica was practically confessing to Lisa Chen's murder while discussing it as a successful business arrangement. I'm so sorry to hear that. It must have been difficult for everyone involved. Monica's expression remained completely neutral. Death is always tragic, but at least we had structured her affairs in a way that minimized complications for her estate. The business partner was able to purchase her ownership interest at fair market value, which provided a substantial inheritance for her family. I felt sick. Monica was describing how they had systematically looted Dr. Chen's assets after murdering her, and she was presenting it as a model for what they wanted to do to me. But I needed to push further. Monica, I have to ask you something that's been troubling me. Sarah seemed very anxious in her last months, almost as if she was afraid of something. Did David ever mention anything about marital problems or trust issues? Monica's demeanor shifted slightly. She leaned back in her chair and studied me with the calculating gaze of someone trying to determine how much I actually knew. Margaret, I think it's important that you understand something about Sarah's mental state before her death. She had become extremely paranoid, convinced that people were trying to harm her or steal from her. David was actually quite worried about her psychological condition. Paranoid how? She had started making wild accusations about David's loyalty, claiming he was somehow conspiring against her. She even hired investigators to follow him, convinced he was having an affair or planning to divorce her. It was really quite sad to watch someone so successful become so irrational. Wild accusations. Irrational. Monica was using the same gaslighting techniques that David had employed, portraying Sarah's legitimate suspicions as mental illness. That doesn't sound like the Sarah I knew, I said carefully. Mental health issues can develop suddenly, especially in people under extreme stress. Sarah was working incredibly long hours, dealing with competitive pressures in her industry, managing complex family dynamics. David tried to get her to seek professional help, but she refused. Monica was building a narrative that would support their defense strategy if criminal charges were filed. Sarah was mentally unstable. Her suspicions were paranoid delusions, and David was a caring husband trying to help his sick wife. Monica, can I ask you about the timing of all this? When did Sarah's paranoia begin? From what David told me, the symptoms started about 6 months before her death, gradually at first, just increased suspicion and anxiety. But it escalated quickly in her final weeks. 6 months. That timeline matched exactly with when Sarah had begun her investigation into David's criminal activities. What Monica was describing as paranoia was actually Sarah's growing awareness that her husband was systematically betraying her. And David never considered that Sarah might have legitimate reasons for her suspicions? Monica's smile became cold and predatory. Margaret, I think you need to be very careful about entertaining conspiracy theories. Sarah's paranoia was a medical condition, not a rational response to real threats. Continuing to believe otherwise could be very damaging to your own mental health. There it was, a direct threat disguised as concern for my well-being. Monica was warning me that if I continued to question their narrative about Sarah's death, I might face the same fate as my daughter. But I had gotten what I came for. Monica had essentially confessed to being involved in Dr. Lisa Chen's murder, had described the systematic gaslighting of Sarah before her death, and had threatened me directly. Combined with David's recorded admissions about Sarah's health symptoms, we now had enough evidence to pursue murder charges. Monica, I appreciate your candor about Sarah's condition. It helps me understand what David was going through. David is a remarkable man, Margaret. He showed incredible patience and loyalty to Sarah despite her increasingly erratic behavior. Very few husbands would have remained so devoted to a wife who was making such serious accusations. Devoted. The word was obscene coming from someone who had helped plan my daughter's murder. I can see why David values your guidance, I replied. You obviously understand complex family dynamics very well. Monica pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Margaret, I'd like to propose that we move forward with the asset restructuring as soon as possible. Every day that passes with the current arrangement is another day of unnecessary stress and liability for you. How quickly could we implement something like this? If you're willing to sign the preliminary agreements today, I can have everything finalized within 72 hours. David is prepared to take over management of Sarah's business immediately, which would relieve you of all operational responsibilities. 72 hours. They wanted to gain control of Sarah's assets before I had time to reconsider or seek independent legal advice. It was the classic high-pressure sales tactic used by con artists to prevent victims from thinking clearly. That seems very fast. Margaret, I understand your hesitation, but delays in these situations often create complications. The longer assets remain in transitional status, the more opportunity there is for problems to develop. Problems. Another veiled threat. Monica was suggesting that bad things might happen to me if I didn't comply with their demands quickly. But I had heard enough. Monica Stevens had just provided law enforcement with detailed confessions to multiple crimes, and she had no idea that every word had been recorded. Monica, I need to think about all of this. It's a big decision, and I want to make sure I'm doing what's best for everyone involved. Her disappointment was obvious, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Of course, Margaret, but I hope you won't take too long to decide. Opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely. As Monica packed up her documents and prepared to leave, I realized that this woman had probably sat across from Sarah in a similar meeting, using the same manipulative techniques, building the same web of lies that would eventually lead to my daughter's murder. But this time, the outcome would be different. This time, justice would prevail. Thank you for your time, Monica. I'll be in touch very soon. After she left, I remained in the conference room for several more minutes, allowing the surveillance team time to coordinate their next moves. Detective Santos would be reviewing the recordings, preparing arrest warrants, and coordinating with law enforcement agencies in multiple states. When I finally walked out of that building, I knew that the war against David Williams and Monica Stevens had entered its final phase. Within hours, they would both be in custody, charged with multiple counts of murder, fraud, and racketeering. Sarah's killers were about to face justice at last. Detective Santos called me at 6:30 that evening, less than 3 hours after my meeting with Monica Stevens. Her voice carried an excitement I had rarely heard from seasoned law enforcement officers. "Margaret, we have them. The recordings from today, combined with everything else we've gathered, provide enough evidence to arrest both David and Monica on multiple felony charges. But more importantly, the toxicology results on Sarah came back this afternoon." My heart stopped. And? Digitalis, significant levels in her heart tissue, liver, and hair follicles. The concentrations indicate she was being poisoned slowly over a period of at least 6 weeks before her death. "Margaret, your daughter was definitely murdered." Murdered. Hearing the words spoken aloud by a police detective made it real in a way that all our suspicions and theories had not. Sarah hadn't died from a sudden cardiac event. She had been systematically poisoned by the man she trusted most in the world. "Detective, when do you make the arrests?" "We're coordinating raids simultaneously in 3 locations tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. David at his apartment, Monica at her house, and a storage facility where we believe they keep evidence from previous victims. We can't risk letting either of them communicate with the other or destroy evidence." "Will I be able to see them arrested?" Detective Santos paused. "Margaret, I understand the desire for personal satisfaction, but I need you to stay far away from the arrest locations. David and Monica are both dangerous, and we can't predict how they'll react when they realize their operation has been exposed." That evening, I called Jennifer Walsh to let her know that her nightmare was finally ending. When I told her about the pending arrests, she broke down crying. "Mrs. Thompson, I never thought this day would come. I've been terrified for years that David would find me and finish what he started, knowing that he'll finally be in prison. I can't even describe the relief." "Jennifer, Detective Santos will probably contact you about testifying at trial. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been preparing for it my entire life since David destroyed my first marriage. I have boxes of evidence, documentation of everything he did to me. I want to make sure he never hurts another woman." I spent a sleepless night thinking about Sarah, about the weeks of suffering she must have endured as the digitalis slowly damaged her heart, about the fear she must have felt as she realized what David was doing to her. But I also thought about her courage, how she had continued building evidence against him even while he was killing her, determined to protect me and ensure that justice would eventually prevail. At 5:45 a.m., my phone rang. It was Detective Santos, calling from outside David's apartment building. "Margaret, in 15 minutes, this will all be over. David Williams and Monica Stevens will be in custody, charged with murder in the first degree. I wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the news. Detective, thank you for everything. You've given my daughter justice." "No, Margaret, you gave her justice. Sarah built the initial case, you provided the evidence that broke it open, and together you created the trap that caught them. I just provided the badges and handcuffs." At 6 a.m. exactly, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Both suspects in custody, no incidents, will call shortly." David Williams and Monica Stevens were finally under arrest. 2 hours later, Detective Santos called with additional details. "Margaret, you're not going to believe what we found at Monica's house. She kept trophies from every victim, photographs, jewelry, personal documents. We found items belonging to Sarah, Dr. Lisa Chen, and at least 8 other women we hadn't previously identified. 8 other women. The scope of their criminal operation was even larger than we had suspected." "There's more," Detective Santos continued. "Monica had detailed files on each victim, including psychological profiles, financial assessments, and timelines for how long the relationship should last before the accident occurred. This was completely premeditated, methodical murder for profit." "What about David? How did he react to being arrested?" "He tried to play innocent at first, claimed he had no idea what we were talking about. But when we showed him the recordings from your meeting with Monica, he realized we had everything. He's already asking about plea bargains." Plea bargains. The idea that David might avoid the death penalty in exchange for cooperation made my blood boil. But I also understood that his testimony might be necessary to convict Monica and to provide closure for all the other victims' families. "Detective, what happens now?" "Both suspects will be arraigned this afternoon. They're being held without bail as flight risks. The prosecutor will probably seek the death penalty for both of them, given the number of victims and the calculated nature of the crimes. That afternoon, I sat in the courthouse gallery as David Williams and Monica Stevens were brought before the judge in orange jumpsuits and shackles. It was the first time I had seen them since discovering their true nature, and I was struck by how different they appeared. David looked broken, defeated, like a man who had finally realized his crimes had caught up with him. But Monica seemed almost defiant, as if she still believed she could manipulate her way out of the situation. The charges were read aloud: murder in the first degree for Sarah Williams and Dr. Lisa Chen, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other felonies. The prosecutor requested that both defendants be held without bail, citing flight risk and danger to the community. Monica's attorney argued for bail, claiming she was a respected businesswoman with no prior criminal record. But when the prosecutor presented evidence of the 8 additional victims and Monica's detailed murder files, the judge denied bail immediately. The court finds that both defendants present an extreme danger to the community and an unacceptable flight risk. Bail is denied. Trial is scheduled to begin in 90 days. As they were led away in shackles, David looked back at the gallery and caught my eye. For a moment, I saw something that might have been remorse or fear or simply the recognition that his life was effectively over. But Monica never looked back. Even facing the death penalty, she maintained the cold, calculating demeanor of someone who viewed other people as nothing more than resources to be exploited. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting with cameras and microphones. I had prepared a brief statement, knowing that Sarah's story would become public and wanting to ensure her memory was honored properly. My daughter Sarah Williams was a brilliant entrepreneur, a loving person, and someone who fought courageously against the criminals who ultimately took her life. Today's arrests represent justice not just for Sarah, but for all the victims of these predators. I hope other families facing similar situations will know that the truth can prevail, even against the most sophisticated criminals. That evening, alone in my apartment, I sat in Sarah's favorite chair and thought about the long journey from her funeral to this moment of justice. The grief would never completely go away, but it was now mixed with something else: pride in my daughter's courage, satisfaction that her killers would face consequences, and hope that other families might be spared the pain we had endured. Sarah had left me an inheritance worth millions of dollars, but her greatest gift was the evidence that brought her killers to justice. The war was almost over. Justice was finally within reach. The trial of David Williams and Monica Stevens began on a cold January morning, exactly 9 months after Sarah's funeral. The courthouse was packed with reporters, victims' families, and law enforcement officers who had worked on the case. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table, where I could see the defendants' faces throughout the proceedings. District Attorney Robert Henley had personally taken over the prosecution, assembling a team of specialists in financial crimes, murder cases, and organized criminal enterprises. The evidence against David and Monica was overwhelming, but Robert warned me that sophisticated criminals often had surprises waiting. Margaret, they're both facing the death penalty, which means they have nothing to lose by fighting to the very end. Expect them to blame each other, to claim they were coerced or manipulated. Monica especially will try to present herself as another victim. The first week of testimony established the scope of the criminal enterprise. FBI agents testified about the multi-state investigation. Forensic accountants detailed the financial fraud, and computer experts explained how David and Monica had used technology to research and target their victims. But the most powerful testimony came from the survivors, women like Jennifer Walsh, who had escaped David's web before he could kill them. Jennifer took the witness stand on Tuesday morning, and for 3 hours she methodically destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt for David Williams. "He didn't just steal my money," Jennifer testified, her voice steady despite the emotional content. "He systematically destroyed my sense of reality. He would move things in my house and then convince me I was losing my memory. He would intercept my mail and tell me I was becoming paranoid. By the end, I didn't trust my own perceptions of anything." The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Karen Mills guided Jennifer through the psychological manipulation techniques David had used. Miss Foster, in your opinion, was David Williams's behavior part of a deliberate strategy? Absolutely. David was preparing me to accept that I was mentally unstable. That way, if I ever tried to report his crimes or challenge his control, people would dismiss my accusations as the paranoid delusions of a sick woman. Jennifer's testimony was devastating because it established the pattern that David had later perfected with Sarah. The psychological manipulation, the gaslighting, the systematic isolation, all techniques designed to make his victims compliant and their eventual deaths appear natural. On Wednesday, Dr. Patricia Martinez, the forensic pathologist who had re-examined Sarah's case, took the stand to explain how digitalis poisoning works. Digitalis is particularly insidious because it mimics natural heart conditions, Dr. Martinez testified. In small doses over time, it causes fatigue, irregular heartbeat, and anxiety, symptoms that could easily be attributed to stress or overwork. But as the poison accumulates in the victim's system, it eventually triggers a massive cardiac event that appears completely natural. The prosecutor displayed enlarged photographs of Sarah's tissue samples, showing the telltale signs of digitalis poisoning. Dr. Martinez, in your professional opinion, how long was Sarah Williams being poisoned before her death? Based on the concentration levels in different tissue types, I estimate she was receiving small doses of digitalis for approximately 8 to 10 weeks before the fatal cardiac event. 8 to 10 weeks. Sarah had been slowly dying for months while David pretended to be a loving, concerned husband. The cruelty of it was almost unbearable. But the prosecution's most damaging evidence came from Monica Stevens herself. The recordings from our meeting were played in their entirety, and the jury listened in horrified silence as Monica casually discussed Dr. Lisa Chen's murder as a successful business arrangement. When Monica's voice filled the courtroom describing how the widow passed away about 18 months later from natural causes, she had heart problems, several jurors visibly reacted with disgust. The defense strategy became clear during the second week of trial. David's attorney argued that he had been manipulated by Monica, that she was the mastermind who had controlled and coerced him into participating in her schemes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, David's attorney argued, my client is not a criminal mastermind. He's another victim of Monica Stevens. She identified him as someone she could manipulate, and she used psychological techniques perfected over years of criminal activity to turn him into her weapon. Monica's defense took the opposite approach. Her attorney claimed that David was a psychopathic killer who had used Monica's legitimate consulting business as cover for his murders. Monica Stevens is a successful businesswoman who specialized in helping families navigate complex estate issues, her attorney argued. She had no knowledge of David Williams's criminal activities or his intent to harm anyone. Watching them turn on each other was satisfying, but it also revealed the true nature of their partnership. Neither felt loyalty or affection for the other. They had been business partners in murder, and now they were willing to sacrifice each other to save themselves. The turning point in the trial came when the prosecution played David's recorded phone conversations with Monica from the week after Sarah's death. The FBI had been monitoring his communications, and what they captured was chilling. The old woman is going to be a problem, David's voice said through the courtroom speakers. She's not as broken as I expected. We might need to move to Phase 2 earlier than planned. Phase 2 was their code for murdering me and making it appear accidental, allowing David to inherit Sarah's estate as her surviving spouse and my next of kin. Monica's voice responded, I can have the documents ready within 48 hours, but you need to be careful about the timing. 2 sudden deaths in the same family would attract attention. The jury was horrified. Not only had David and Monica murdered Sarah, they had been actively planning to kill me as well. On Friday of the 3rd week, both defendants took the witness stand in their own defense. It was a desperate gamble, but facing the death penalty, they had little choice. David's testimony was pathetic. He claimed to love Sarah deeply, denied knowing anything about digitalis, and insisted that Monica had threatened to kill him if he didn't cooperate with her schemes. But under cross-examination, District Attorney Henley methodically destroyed David's credibility. Mr. Williams, or should I say Mr. Kowalski, you testified that you loved Sarah deeply. Is that why you took out a $2 million life insurance policy on her? That was Monica's idea. She said it was standard financial planning. And was it also Monica's idea for you to have an affair with Jennifer Morrison while your wife was supposedly dying of heart problems? David's face flushed red. My relationship with Jennifer had nothing to do with Sarah's death. Really? Because according to your recorded conversation with Ms. Morrison on March 15th, you told her that Sarah would be out of the picture soon and that you would have enough money to take care of both of us. What did you mean by that, Mr. Kowalski? David's testimony collapsed completely. By the time Henley finished with him, the jury was looking at David with open contempt. Monica's testimony was more sophisticated, but equally doomed. She maintained her composure and stuck to her story that she was a legitimate consultant who had been deceived by David. But when Assistant District Attorney Mills played the recording of Monica describing Dr. Lisa Chen's death as a successful business model, Monica had no explanation that made sense. Ms. Stevens, you testified that you had no knowledge of any murders, but in this recorded conversation, you describe Dr. Chen's death in detail and suggest using it as a template for Mrs. Thompson's situation. How do you explain that? Monica's mask finally slipped. That conversation was taken out of context. I was discussing legitimate estate planning strategies. Estate planning strategies that involve the estate owner dying of heart problems? I was speaking hypothetically about potential scenarios. It was over. Monica Stevens, the sophisticated criminal who had destroyed dozens of families, was reduced to stumbling explanations that no reasonable person could believe. Closing arguments began on Monday of the fourth week. District Attorney Henley's summation was masterful, tying together all the evidence into a narrative of calculated evil that had finally been brought to justice. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard evidence of crimes so calculated, so heartless, so utterly without regard for human life, that they challenge our ability to comprehend how such evil can exist in the world. But you have also heard evidence of courage, the courage of Sarah Williams, who documented her killer's crimes even while they were murdering her, the courage of survivors like Jennifer Foster, who risked their safety to testify, and the courage of Margaret Thompson, who refused to let her daughter's killers escape justice. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, both David Williams and Monica Stevens were sentenced to death. As they were led away in shackles for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace. Sarah's killers would never hurt another family. Justice had finally been served. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood in the boardroom of Thompson Williams Tech Solutions, Sarah's company that had become my responsibility and, unexpectedly, my purpose. The business had not only survived the chaos of the criminal investigation, but had actually grown stronger under the management team Sarah had carefully assembled. Mrs. Thompson, said Marcus Chen, our Chief Technology Officer, the new cybersecurity division is exceeding all projections. The clients love knowing that their data protection is being handled by a company that truly understands the importance of fighting predators. Sarah's company had found its new mission in the aftermath of her murder. We now specialized in developing technology solutions to protect vulnerable people from financial predators, identity thieves, and online criminals. It felt like the perfect tribute to my daughter's memory, using her business expertise to prevent other families from experiencing what we had endured. The farm in Millbrook County had become something even more meaningful. I had transformed it into the Sarah Williams Center for Family Justice, a nonprofit organization that provided legal assistance and investigative resources to families dealing with domestic financial abuse. Jennifer Walsh had become our first full-time counselor, using her experience with David's manipulation to help other victims recognize and escape similar situations. Margaret, Jennifer said during our weekly planning meeting, we've received over 200 requests for assistance since the center opened. Word is spreading that there's finally somewhere families can turn when they're being victimized by people they trusted. Patricia Rodriguez had also joined our team, establishing an investigative unit that worked with law enforcement agencies across the country to identify and prosecute financial predators. The evidence we had gathered against Monica Stevens had led to investigations in 12 states and the identification of over 30 additional victims. The pattern is always the same. Patricia explained to a group of law enforcement officers visiting our center. These criminals target successful women who are isolated, vulnerable, or going through major life transitions. They use marriage, business partnerships, or caregiving relationships to gain access to assets and personal information. But once families know what to look for, these predators become much easier to stop. Detective Santos, who had been promoted to lieutenant after the successful prosecution, often brought new cases to our attention. The law enforcement community had come to recognize that sophisticated financial predators required specialized investigative techniques and resources that traditional police departments often lacked. "Margaret, I have a case in Ohio that looks identical to what David and Monica were doing," she told me during a recent visit. "A 60-year-old widow whose new husband is showing all the same behavioral patterns. But this time, we're going to catch him before he can hurt anyone." The most satisfying aspect of our work was hearing from families we had helped. Last month, I received a letter from a woman in Texas whose daughter had been targeted by a marriage scammer using techniques almost identical to David's methods. "Mrs. Thompson," she wrote, "your center provided the resources we needed to expose this man before he could destroy our family. My daughter is safe, the criminal is in prison, and we know that other families have been spared because of your work. Sarah's legacy is protecting people she will never meet." On the anniversary of Sarah's death, I visited her grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone I had chosen was simple but meaningful. Sarah Elizabeth Williams, beloved daughter, brilliant entrepreneur, courageous fighter for justice. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, placing fresh flowers on her grave. "I wanted to tell you what we've accomplished this year. David is on death row where he belongs. Monica won't see the outside of a prison cell for the rest of her life. And your company, our company now, is helping other families fight back against people just like them." I told her about the center, about Jennifer's recovery and new purpose, about the dozens of families we had helped protect. But mostly, I told her how proud I was of the evidence she had gathered, the courage she had shown, and the legacy she had left behind. "You saved me, Sarah. Even after they killed you, the case you built brought them to justice and gave me a reason to keep fighting. I love you, and I promise that we'll keep using your work to protect other families." As I drove home from the cemetery, I thought about the conversation Sarah and I never had, the one where she was going to warn me about David and explain the evidence she had gathered. But in a way, we did have that conversation. Through her investigation files, her carefully constructed will, and her strategic planning, Sarah had communicated everything I needed to know to fight back and win. That evening, I received a call from Robert Henley, who had returned to private practice after successfully prosecuting the case. "Margaret, I have some news. The Supreme Court denied David's final appeal. His execution is scheduled for next month. David Williams would finally face the ultimate consequence for his crimes. Justice delayed, but not denied. And Monica? She'll never see another appeal succeed either. The evidence was too overwhelming, the crimes too heinous. She'll die in prison." After I hung up, I sat in Sarah's favorite chair, now my favorite chair, and reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed me from a grieving mother into a fighter for justice. I had learned that grief could coexist with purpose, that loss could become the foundation for protecting others, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil is simply refusing to give up. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a woman from Arizona whose elderly father was being financially abused by his new wife. "Mrs. Thompson, I found your center online. I think my father is in danger, and I don't know who else to call." "You called the right place," I told her. "Tell me what's happening, and we'll help you protect your father." As I listened to another family's story of betrayal and fear, I realized that Sarah's true inheritance wasn't the money or the business or even the farm. Her real gift to me was purpose, the knowledge that I could use my experience, resources, and determination to prevent other families from losing the people they loved most. David Williams and Monica Stevens had thought they were destroying my family when they murdered my daughter, but instead, they had created something much more powerful, a network of survivors dedicated to ensuring that predators like them could never again use trust and love as weapons against innocent families. Sarah would have been proud of what we had built from the ashes of our tragedy. And I knew that somewhere, somehow, she was still fighting alongside us. The war against predators who target families would never truly end. But Sarah had given us the weapons to win every battle that mattered. Her legacy was justice. Her gift was hope. Her victory was eternal.